Okay. So first of all, really thank you very much for this very rare afternoon, I would say. Really rare afternoon. Very pleased that all of you are here. I just want to start the discussion, and then of course I want you to ask, not me. So there was this issue, and Yuval just mentioned it, and somebody in the audience, I think, asked it, Amnon, the issue of ethics. I mean, robotics and ethics, because you related to this, but I didn't completely myself understood the answer. So there is this classical ethical questions, you know, there is a crossroad, and there is a car going, and there is an old woman, and there is a child, and the car has to decide, so to speak, or the person that drives the car has to decide. Typically, you do something spontaneous. I don't know what I will decide in this case myself. But I guess when you design a car, and you mentioned a little bit, but they didn't completely follow the argument about what will happen if the car is already there. You cannot plan it in advance, and there will be the two people, the child and the old woman, jumping into the crossroad. Don't you have to a priori define some kind of ethical rules within Mobileye?
Okay, so the idea of ethical dilemmas is that first you're allowed to create accidents. You're allowed to choose which accident to create. In the model that we built, you're not allowed to do so. So you're allowed to do whatever you like. You can violate traffic laws, but you're not allowed to create an accident, even if you think there's a dangerous situation coming upon you from another road user. You are absolutely certain that that other road user, let's say it's a car, is going to hit you. And you think that if you create another accident, you'll be able to ameliorate the overall impact. You're not allowed to do so. What you're allowed to do, you're allowed to break longitudinal, you're allowed to break lateral, you're allowed to violate traffic laws, but you're not allowed to create an accident. So the guarantee that we can give is that you'll never cause an accident. So this is the basis. Now we go to regulatory bodies in order to standardize all of this. Because in order for this safety net to really work, it's not sufficient that we, Mobileye, use it as part of our autonomous car. We have to create kind of an overall agreement with regulatory bodies such that when an accident will happen, the model that we created is accepted by the court and so forth. Now, when we go and approach regulatory bodies, they raise this issue of ethical dilemmas. And then we tell them, now, if you want to allow creating an accident, it's up to you. You, regulator, you define when creating an accident is allowed. You define the conditions, and then our model will create a context, a formal context around it. For example, it will assign blame using a blame transitivity. This is the idea, because ethical dilemmas, it's not an algorithm, it's not something that you have a solution. Somebody needs to play God. And a tech company cannot do that. It's the regulator who can do that.
Okay. Anybody? Yes.
Thank you. On the last lecture before Yuval, we had a joke that the machine made. And the lecturer, you said, but we don't know if the machine understands what it said. Now, regarding to meditation, like in most cases, humans also don't understand why they say something or why is it funny. So my question is, also it connects to ethics with regards to Piaget's model of ethics and the attempt of games theory to model ethics as something that is effective in the long term in a social circle, like the rules that are effective long term. And it's rules that you can act out even if you don't understand them. And maybe machines can also act them out without understanding them. So my question is, how ethics connects to consciousness and understandings in machines and how it differs from humans in your view? And it's a little complex question.
Both talk about it. So you ask both about understanding and ethics and the relationship, so that's a big question. Let me say first about the understanding part. It's very difficult to know whether the system understands or not what it says, but the suspicion there is that maybe it was trained on many examples. They didn't have bulls, they had cows. They didn't have Theseus, they had some other person. But maybe just copy-paste, so similar things that it saw before, replacing them, and it's just a mechanical way of going from the cartoon into some linguistic expression that does not entail or does not involve things that we would call internally understanding why it's funny. Let me know that it's a really good question in general. People do not understand our books about what makes things funny, and there are great debates about it. This by itself is an open problem. Darwin had a book on humor and making things funny and why humor evolved, and it apparently bothered him a lot, and he thought that's a deep and interesting question. So it's not easy to tell what judgment of funniness is, and as a result, as I said, it's an open question in which I feel that the behavior produced by the machine is more of a surface behavior without deeper level of understanding. Let me just comment quickly about an aspect of ethics that it's actually a huge issue, and I don't know how many know, but new institutions sprang up all over the world. There is an institute in Oxford University, the Center for Existential Risks, with many people involved in it, and they defined what are the big risks for humanity over the next foreseeable future generation. Rank number one was AI. That's the conclusion that they reached. Steve Hawkins said that in his mind, the greatest danger to humanity in general is AI and the way it may develop. Elon Musk, who started Tesla and SpaceX and so on, he started with his own money a new institution called OpenAI, designed to fight or to worry about future dangers of AI. So the question here is not if AI would be smart or not, but the question is ethical. Would AI be good or bad eventually? So there are real concerns about ethical questions that people worry about, and it became a big issue in broad circles.
About understanding, well, there are two meanings to the words. Some refer to understand by understanding that you have to have conscious awareness. And in this case, as far as we know, no AI, robot, or computer have any understanding. A different definition is the depth of their ability to see what's behind the problem. And according to this approach, actually AI could have far better understanding of situations than humans. In the case of an accident on the road, for example, the AI would be able to understand what is happening, take in a lot more information than the human, and process it much faster. So in many, many cases, I think AI in this sense will have a better understanding of the situation, like what happens if I turn right, if I turn left, and so forth. And also it will be more ethical in the sense of being able to actually implement its best ideas. One of the biggest problems in ethics that we tend to ignore is the huge gap between our theoretical philosophies and our actual behavior. You can sit in an air-conditioned seminar room and have a big discussion about what's the right thing to do if you are going to have this accident and either kill the baby or the old woman. And everybody can, after like a long discussion, the best philosophers in the world can agree what is the right thing to do. And then they go out of the seminar, and it happens, and it's so quickly, and you just react from the gut, and you forget all your philosophy. The big advantage of AI in this respect is that you can have the best philosophers in the world discuss this and reach an agreement. Let's say they manage to reach an agreement, and then you program the self-driving car accordingly, and you can be 99.99% certain that this is exactly what the car will do in an accident. With humans, it's not like that. They can have the best ideas in the world, but in a time of crisis, they will often forget them. So the level of ethics of the AI just depends on those who programmed it. And therefore, I think that in all the discussion of artificial intelligence, we sometimes tend to forget natural stupidity. The real problem in ethics of AI is not the artificial intelligence of computer, it's the natural stupidity of humans. If you have good humans designing the AI, the results will be wonderful. But if it falls into the hands of the wrong humans, the results are catastrophic. So it just amplifies the quality of the humans who are still in charge.
Yeah, I just want to, I hate to be in the opposition again to everyone, but I have a...
Tali, that's what is expected of you.
Yeah, I know. I'm getting used to it, but I still hate it. But I have a very, I mean, educated as partly a mathematician. I mean, I learned to be very careful about terms which have some sort of circular definition, or what we call self-reference. And as you probably, many of you know, I mean, this can lead to many paradoxes and that are fundamental in our understanding of computer science, of logic, of science in general. And I always have the feeling when I hear, you know, do I know that the machine don't have humor, or they don't understand anything, or they have conscience, that essentially we are talking about something which is not measurable, I mean, as far as I know. And I really cannot say with any level of confidence that my computer is not conscious. Now, and I truly believe it. I mean, it's obviously very primitive at this point. I mean, I don't suspect my iPhone to attack me at some point. So, first of all, I'm not sure that emotions and consciousness are so clearly tied together as you argue. And we dragged into things which are not measurable and not quantifiable, and this is, for me, a region I'm trying to avoid. On the other hand, there are obviously measures. I mean, so ethic is also something quite strange. I mean, if you look at my tiger and deer on my first slide, ethic for whom? I mean, is it correct for the tiger to catch the deer or not? I mean, so ethic is always in some sense subjective. I don't believe there's an absolute ethic or there's an absolute moral. And whenever it's always relative to the context and relative to who you are and relative to who you think about, I think this is one of our biggest problems. There's no absolute theory of ethics. So in some sense, I expect my machines to develop it. It's going to be a self-emerging property, just like they develop representations of the problem as we actually see, and they generate all sorts of abstract notions which we couldn't believe can happen. I mean, just before Deep Blue beat Kasparov, a year earlier, most people said that winning humans, the best human in chess, is going to take 20 years. They said the same, exactly the same about Go. And somehow when I hear Shimon, I think that you really don't want your deep learning system to have anything intelligent that you define them like this. I mean, so first of all, obviously, deep learning is still at a very infant stage of intelligence. And as somebody said here, I mean, we don't have the full sensing active cycle yet, although we start to see it in the reinforcement learning regime. Without feedback, as a feed-forward machines, they will always be very primitive. And we cannot talk about, but once we have feedbacks, and interaction with the environment on multiple timescales, as I mentioned, I don't see any reason to assume axiomatically that this thing will not be conscious or self-aware or develop sense of humor or whatever you want.
I think it would be useful to demystify a bit what we call AI. The AI that we have today, which is deep networks, the best way to think about it is a very efficient lookup table. It's basically a memorization engine. This is why the Google face recognition requires 240 million pictures to train. It's, you have so many pictures, and you have an efficient lookup table, then it's not that surprising you can be very, very good at face recognition. Now, obviously, humans don't work that way. We don't look at 200 million pictures in order to identify a new member of the class. But once you think about it in that way, simply a lookup table, I think questions about ethics, about consciousness, about, they become a bit more on the ground level. Today, what we know to do with AI is one very, very nice and efficient lookup table. There are still mysteries there, why it is so efficient, why it is efficient on certain problems and not efficient on other problems. For example, if you want to build a neural network that will multiply numbers, you'll not be able to do it. You know, there have been attempts to do it. There are all sorts of enigmas, very, very simple problems that neural networks cannot solve. So one of the mysteries, why the problems that neural networks are very good at, why they are very good at those problems or not. But eventually, at the end, it's one very, very efficient lookup table. So this kind of demystifies the issues of ethics and consciousness.
Question?
So for Yuval, you said in your lecture that you don't believe that computers will gain consciousness, and on the other hand, you said that you don't understand, we yet don't understand why consciousness helps us solve any problems. So my question to you is what evolutionary advantage did it have? How come that it evolved to be such a central thing in our life?
Well, I didn't say, or at least didn't intend to say, that I'm sure computers will not develop consciousness. I have no idea. I said we have so far no indication as of 2018 that computers are on the way to developing consciousness. There is nothing, as far as I know, in the record of the development of computers since the 1940s and 50s that indicates they are on the path. They are on the path to superintelligence. They're becoming better and better in solving many, many problems. But this is why I differentiated intelligence from consciousness. Now, what is the evolutionary advantage of consciousness?
For
humans, I have no idea. I mean, again, starting with the assumption that this is all about calculations, it's all about calculating probabilities. I think that, at least, again, for 2018, the better we understand the brain, the more unclear what the role of consciousness becomes. The brain works so well, in like 99% of the tasks of the brain, it accomplishes without any consciousness. Why does it need this second layer of the conscious experience of fear in order to decide to run away from a tiger? I don't know, and I don't think that we have a good answer at present. I suspect that the enigma is really mathematical. I mean, that we don't have anything even approaching a mathematical representation of consciousness, of subjective experiences. So it's not surprising that at least as long as we understand the brain as an algorithm making calculations, it's a total mystery why the hell consciousness is helpful in any kind of calculation.
One thing that biological systems need and computers don't is that they need to survive. And since you have limited resources, fear is a way to load balance your resources. So the emotion of fear would now limit your computing resources to one particular task, which is to survive. And this is something that a computer does not need. First, a computer can have infinite resources and does not need to survive. And this is why it fits to what Yuval said in his lecture, that we can imagine intelligence in computers without having consciousness, because you have unlimited resources.
One thing I think, we do use it, I think, sometimes to solve problems. Not that it cannot be done without it, but I think that very often when you have to decide on some future action, we try to imagine how would we feel if we took this way or another. And if we feel that, oh, you know, if we bet on something, it may turn out the wrong way, I would feel terrible, I would be so disappointed, it's not something that I want to risk, and so on. So I think that we use our sort of simulation of future events and try to imagine the way that it would feel to us, and we use it in making decisions. Now, it's entirely possible, and one would argue, yes, but you can do the whole thing by some other, you measure it by some other means, and you say that the consequence will be +5 or -17, and you make decisions without you don't need any awareness of the situation or imagining what it would feel like. And that's true, but somehow in our biological world, that's the way we use. I would just react to Tali, and I think that's an open question. It's really very difficult to decide. Some people, as we know, brush off. They say, I cannot measure consciousness, and therefore it's not a real scientific problem, and let's not worry about it. Some other people say that, when I look outside, the only thing that I'm really certain about, as Descartes said, is that I only can be certain about my own perspective and what I feel about the world. All the other things are inferences. The only real measurement is what comes from subjective appearance. So we should worry about it a lot, and all the rest matter less for that matter. So it's very difficult. There is no mathematical proof for one attitude or the other. I'm not sure how one side can convince the other. I was engaged in many many discussions of this sort, and it turns out that you never manage to switch a person from one attitude to the second, and somehow are divided into two subspecies: those who think that consciousness is at the heart of many things. Many people go to brain science and psychology, scientific psychology, because they feel that at the core they want to understand awareness and consciousness and how it feels like and so on, and let's see what we can do to promote it. And separate people brush it aside and say, let's not worry about it. It's not a real phenomenon, and we don't have to. So I belong to one subspecies, but I know that many people belong to the other.
Oh, okay. This is also mainly for Yuval. So I like your talk very much, and I agree with most of what you said. The one thing that I have a bit of an issue with is this idea of mind, which is a conflation of consciousness and thought. And I think that these two things are very separate, and it's very important to distinguish between them, because I think that there's a strong argument to be made that the information content of thought is something which physically emerges in the brain, right? So if you hear something, if you hear a tone, that's something that we can decode from the neurons very easily. And I think that the same thing applies for feelings. Even complex narratives are probably things that we can decode from the brain. And I think that those kinds of neural correlates can actually tell us a lot about thought and can tell us a lot about the things that people are feeling. And in fact, if the meditation teaches us anything, it's the fact that we are not in control of our thoughts, because our thoughts are processes that are produced by the brain and not in our control.
Yeah, in speaking very general terms, you can say that mind or the stream of consciousness, you can divide it into three main parts, which is thoughts, emotions, and sensations, but they are not really distinct from one another. They're very deeply interconnected. We think that our thoughts, like our intellectual thoughts, are totally separate from our sensations of hunger or cold or heat, but they are not. And also the judgments that we make are, to a far greater extent than most people realize, are influenced every moment by the sensory level. And they are not taking place in some isolated intellectual ivory tower where thoughts are completely distinct from sensations. So this is more like a conceptual framework than a real division between them. And yes, we have very little control over all three. We don't decide what sensations we feel, we don't decide what emotions take over us, and we usually don't decide what thoughts starts popping up in our brain, in our mind. Just, very simple experiment, just, close your eyes and observe the stream of thoughts, and the next thought that pops up, did you decide to think it before you thought it? Obviously not. Why did I think this thought? Of all the possible thoughts in the world, why did I think this thought right now? There are all kinds of explanations, but it is not something that I control, that I decide. It will be an infinite regression if I could do that.
Okay, I actually feel that tiredness is also some part of the human being situation. So, but still, I want a very fast summary from Henry Marquardt. So first of all, thank you very much for this panel. You can go there.